The reason you feel so drained in your relationship is because your partner, the avoidant, is sucking all the energy out of your body. You are stressed and anxious all the time. The avoidant is highly dependent on you. Now, this might sound the opposite, and you may feel like the avoidant does not even care about you. But that is not true. Let me explain. You have invested enormous energy attempting to control the avoidant's behavior through strategic approaches designed to make them miss you, to trigger their pursuit, to activate their attachment system, to generate their fear of losing you. You implement no contact not because you genuinely need space, but because you hope the absence will make them realize what they lost and come running back. You post carefully curated social media content designed to make them jealous, to show them you are thriving without them, to activate their competitive instincts or their fear that you might be moving on. You carefully manage your availability, responding to their messages after calculated delays to appear busy, declining their invitations strategically to make yourself seem less available, creating artificial scarcity, hoping scarcity will increase your value in their perception. You analyze their psychology, obsessively seeking the exact formula that will unlock their defended heart. Reading articles about avoidant attachment, hoping to discover the secret strategy that will transform their patterns. All this effort stems from understandable desire to create change in relationship that is not meeting your needs, to generate the pursuit and investment you legitimately deserve, to make the avoidant see your value and treat you accordingly. Yet these control strategies consistently fail to produce the lasting change you seek, and often backfire by activating the avoidance defenses more intensely, by confirming their narrative that relationships involve pressure and manipulation they must protect themselves against, by creating dynamic where any change they make feels coerced rather than chosen, and therefore cannot be sustained. The fundamental problem with control strategies is that they attempt to externally manipulate someone into internal change that can only occur through their own choice and their own work. You cannot strategize someone into secure attachment, cannot manipulate someone into genuine desire for intimacy, cannot control someone into authentic investment that comes from their authentic recognition of your value rather than from their defensive response to your strategic moves. The control strategies also cost you tremendously by keeping you focused on managing them rather than building yourself, by maintaining you in reactive position where your behavior is determined by what you think will affect them rather than by what serves your genuine well-being, by preventing you from developing the authentic independence and self-focus that would actually shift the dynamic more effectively than any strategic manipulation. The path forward requires a completely different approach. Stop trying to control the avoidant through strategies and tactics. Stop organizing your behavior around what you think will make them change. Stop investing energy in attempting to manipulate their psychology into producing outcomes you want. Instead, redirect all that energy toward yourself, toward building genuinely satisfying life that does not need them to change to be fulfilling, toward developing authentic boundaries that protect you rather than manipulate them, toward becoming a person who is genuinely indifferent to their patterns rather than a person who performs indifference as strategy. This shift from external control of them to internal development of yourself paradoxically creates more actual change in the dynamic than strategic manipulation ever could, while simultaneously protecting you from continued damage if the dynamic does not change in ways you need. Control strategies activate their defenses harder than authentic boundaries ever could. You believe strategic manipulation will soften the avoidance defenses and make them more available. You think creating jealousy will make them pursue you. Implementing no contact will make them miss you. Appearing busy will make them value your time. Posting attractive content will activate their competitive instincts. Yet these control strategies produce opposite effect from what you intend, because the avoidance defensive structure is specifically designed to detect and protect against attempts to control or manipulate them. Their childhood experiences taught them that closeness involves being controlled, that relationships include manipulation they must guard against, that letting their guard down leads to being pressured or managed by others. Your strategic attempts to control their behavior confirm their defended worldview that relationships are unsafe territory where people attempt to manipulate them, triggering their defenses more intensely rather than softening those defenses. The avoidant detects your control strategies through their highly attuned sensitivity to others' intentions and emotional states. They sense when your no contact is strategic rather than genuine, when you are implementing absence to make them miss you rather than because you genuinely need space for yourself. They recognize when your social media posts are designed to trigger their jealousy rather than reflecting authentic sharing of your life. They feel when your limited availability is performance designed to appear busy rather than genuine result of fulfilling life that actually occupies your time. They perceive when your behavior is calculated to generate specific response from them rather than emerging from your authentic needs and preferences. This detection activates their defenses because it signals you are trying to control them, trying to manipulate their feelings, trying to generate specific behavior through strategic management of your own behavior. The activated defenses manifest through increased withdrawal that contradicts your intention to create more pursuit. You implement no contact hoping they will reach out, yet your strategic absence activates their defended independence, and they feel relief rather than missing you because they sense the absence is manipulative rather than genuine. You post content designed to make them jealous, yet your strategic posting activates their deactivation, and they feel nothing or feel irritation at your transparent attempt to manipulate their feelings. You appear strategically busy, yet your calculated unavailability activates their defended autonomy, and they feel validated in their belief that they do not need you rather than feeling motivated to pursue your limited attention. The control strategies backfire by triggering exactly the defended responses you hope to overcome. The avoidant also experiences your control strategies as pressure that confirms their narrative about relationships being suffocating or demanding. When you implement strategic no contact, they experience it as manipulation, attempting to control their behavior through punishing absence. This feels like pressure even though you are absent rather than present. When you post strategic content, they experience it as demand for their attention and their emotional response. This feels demanding even though you are not directly asking for anything. When you manage your availability strategically, they experience it as game playing that requires them to pursue in ways that feel like relationship pressure. This activates their resistance, even though your overt behavior appears to be giving them space. Your attempts to control them through indirect strategic means create the same pressure that direct requests would create, activating their defenses against relationship demands. Authentic boundaries operate completely differently from strategic manipulation and produce different effects on the avoidance defensive structure. Authentic boundaries emerge from genuine self-protection rather than from calculated attempt to control the avoidance behavior. You implement no contact because you genuinely need space from relationship that harms you, not because you hope absence will make them miss you. You limit your availability because you are genuinely busy building satisfying life, not because you are performing scarcity to increase your value. You post about your life because you authentically want to share your experiences, not because you are attempting to generate jealousy. You establish consequences for their patterns because you genuinely will not continue tolerating those patterns, not because you hope consequences will manipulate them into changing. The authenticity of genuine boundaries communicates something entirely different to the avoidance defensive structure than strategic manipulation communicates. Authentic boundaries say, I am protecting myself from harm, rather than saying, I am trying to control you. Genuine consequences say, I will not accept this treatment, rather than saying, I am punishing you to make you behave differently. Real independence says, I am building fulfilling life, rather than saying, I am trying to control you, than saying, I am performing independence to make you want me more. The avoidance defenses do not activate against authentic self-protection the way they activate against strategic manipulation, because authentic boundaries are not about controlling them. They are about you taking care of yourself regardless of their response. Authentic boundaries actually command more respect from avoidance than strategic manipulation ever generates, because authentic boundaries demonstrate genuine self-respect and genuine standards, rather than demonstrating willingness to play games to control them. The avoidant recognizes when boundaries are real versus when they are strategic, recognizes when your behavior emerges from genuine self-care versus from calculated attempt to manipulate their response. Real boundaries that you enforce consistently regardless of their reaction communicate that you have actual limits and actual standards. This generates respect, or at minimum, generates recognition that you are serious. Strategic manipulation that shifts based on their response communicates that your behavior is performance designed to control them. This generates defensiveness or dismissal rather than respect. The critical difference involves your internal orientation and your genuine investment in outcome. Strategic manipulation requires you to remain intensely focused on them, constantly tracking whether your strategy is generating desired response, adjusting your tactics based on their reaction. This orientation keeps you reactive and dependent on their behavior even while you are attempting to control that behavior. Authentic boundaries require you to become focused on yourself, implementing protection regardless of their response, maintaining your standards whether or not they motivate their change. This orientation makes you genuinely independent and genuinely indifferent to their patterns in ways that strategic performed indifference never achieves. Understanding that control strategies activate defenses while authentic boundaries command respect allows you to recognize that the path to any possible change in the avoidant involves abandoning attempts to manipulate them and instead developing genuine boundaries that protect you regardless of whether those boundaries generate their change. Stop implementing no contact as strategy and start implementing it as genuine self-protection if relationship harms you. Stop managing your availability strategically and start being genuinely busy with fulfilling life. Stop posting content designed to trigger jealousy and start sharing authentically, or stop sharing entirely if you are doing it for their benefit. The shift from strategic manipulation to authentic boundaries eliminates the game playing that activates their defenses while developing the genuine self-respect and genuine independence that might actually shift the dynamic, or at minimum protects you if the dynamic does not shift in ways you need. You cannot strategize someone into healthy attachment. They either choose growth or they don't. You search endlessly for the perfect strategy that will unlock the avoidance capacity for healthy attachment, the right balance of distance and pursuit that will feel safe enough that they can open up, the perfect demonstration of your value that will make them recognize you are worth investing in, the exact formula of boundaries and consequences that will motivate them to change their patterns. You believe that if you just find the right approach, if you just implement the correct strategy, if you just manage the dynamic properly, you can create the conditions that will allow or force the avoidant to develop secure attachment and to show up adequately in relationship. This belief that external strategic management can produce internal attachment transformation keeps you trapped in an exhausting cycle of analyzing their responses, adjusting your tactics, implementing new strategies, searching for the approach that will finally generate the lasting change you seek. Yet the fundamental reality that undermines all strategic attempts to change the avoidant is that attachment healing requires internal work that must be chosen by the person doing the healing. No external strategy can substitute for this internal choice and internal effort. Healthy attachment develops through the avoidant examining their defensive patterns, understanding their attachment wounds, developing insight about how their defenses harm themselves and others, practicing vulnerability despite discomfort, engaging in therapeutic process that challenges their defended structure. This work is difficult, uncomfortable, often painful. It requires the avoidant to face wounds they have spent lifetime avoiding, to challenge defenses that have protected them since childhood, to tolerate vulnerability that feels threatening to their entire psychological organization. Your strategies cannot do this work for them, regardless of how perfectly calibrated those strategies are. You cannot create enough external safety to override their internal sense of threat that vulnerability generates. You cannot demonstrate your value compellingly enough to overcome their defended deactivation of attachment needs. You cannot implement consequences severe enough to force them to do internal work they are not choosing to do. You cannot manage the dynamic perfectly enough that they develop secure attachment without having to do the uncomfortable work that developing secure attachment requires. The change you seek requires them choosing to engage their healing process. Your strategies are completely irrelevant to whether they make that choice. The avoidant either chooses growth or they do not choose growth, and their choice is independent of your strategic management of the relationship. Some avoidants reach a point where their patterns create sufficient consequences that they become motivated to engage healing work. They lose important relationship. They recognize their patterns, harm people they care about. They face that their defended isolation is not actually satisfying. They encounter crisis that destabilizes their defenses enough that they become willing to examine those defenses. These avoidants choose growth not because someone strategized them into it, but because their own suffering or their own recognition of their pattern's cause motivated them to engage difficult work of healing. Other avoidants never reach this point. They continue their patterns indefinitely. They lose relationships without changing. They maintain their defenses successfully enough that they never face sufficient discomfort to motivate change. These avoidants do not choose growth regardless of how perfectly their partners strategize. Your strategic efforts cannot determine which category the avoidant falls into. You cannot make avoidant who will not choose growth suddenly choose growth through implementing perfect strategy. You cannot prevent avoidant who genuinely chooses growth from doing that healing work regardless of your strategic management. The choice to grow is theirs. Your strategies are not the determining variable in whether they make that choice. This recognition is painful because it requires accepting your powerlessness to create the change you desperately want to see, requires facing that the outcome is not in your control regardless of how much effort you invest in strategic management. The belief that perfect strategy can create change also prevents you from making clear-eyed assessment of whether the avoidant is actually choosing growth. You interpret any small shift in their behavior as evidence your latest strategy is working, as sign they are beginning to change, as reason to continue investing in relationship, hoping more of the same strategy will produce more change. Yet small temporary shifts often reflect the avoidant's defensive management of your reactions, rather than reflecting genuine internal change. They provide slightly more presence when you threaten to leave, not because they are healing, but because they are managing your threat to their comfortable access to you. They express slightly more feeling when you implement boundaries, not because they are becoming more emotionally available, but because they are performing enough emotion to soften your boundaries. These temporary defensive adaptations are not growth, and they are not sustainable change. They are strategic responses to your strategies that disappear once your pressure decreases. Understanding that you cannot strategize someone into healthy attachment allows you to recognize that you face simple choice. Accept the avoidant as they currently are with their current patterns and their current capacity, or leave relationship because current reality is inadequate regardless of potential future change. This choice eliminates the middle ground where you remain in relationship, hoping your strategies will eventually produce the change that makes relationship viable. Either they are choosing growth right now in visible, sustained ways, actively engaging therapy, demonstrating genuine examination of their patterns, showing consistent behavioral change across months, not days, or they are not choosing growth. And your strategies will not create that choice regardless of how perfectly you implement them. The recognition also allows you to redirect the enormous energy you have invested in strategic management toward assessment of whether relationship meets your needs as it currently exists. Stop analyzing what strategy might work to change them and start assessing whether you can accept them as they are. Stop searching for the perfect approach to unlock their capacity and start evaluating whether their current demonstrated capacity is adequate for your well-being. Stop trying to strategize them into growth and start deciding whether you will accept relationship with someone at their current level of functioning, or whether you need to leave to protect yourself from ongoing exposure to patterns that harm you. The avoidant will either choose growth through their own internal motivation and their own internal work, or they will not choose growth regardless of your strategic efforts. Your strategies cannot determine their choice. Your role is not to find the perfect approach to make them choose growth. Your role is to decide whether you will remain with someone who is not currently choosing growth while hoping they eventually will, or whether you will leave to create space for a relationship with someone who has already done enough healing work that their current capacity is adequate for healthy partnership. Focus on becoming someone who doesn't need them to change to be happy. You have organized your life and your happiness around the avoidant and their potential change. You wait for them to become more available so you can feel secure. You hope for them to become more emotionally engaged so you can feel fulfilled. You work to make them prioritize you so you can feel valued. Your well-being is hostage to their behavior and their patterns, fluctuating based on whether they are currently providing more presence or less presence, rising when they show signs of improvement and plummeting when they withdraw again. This dependent position keeps you trapped in relationship that does not meet your needs, while you wait for the avoidant to change enough that relationship becomes satisfying. Yet this waiting position guarantees your continued unhappiness, because your happiness depends on variable you cannot control, whether they choose to do the work to change their patterns. The radical alternative involves building life and developing happiness that does not require them to change, that remains stable regardless of their patterns, that fulfills you whether or not they ever develop capacity to show up adequately. This shift from dependence on their change to independence from their patterns represents fundamental transformation in your orientation. You stop organizing your life around them and start organizing your life around yourself. You stop waiting for them to provide what you need and start providing what you need for yourself, or finding it through other sources. You stop making your happiness contingent on their behavior and start building happiness that exists independently of whether they change. The independence building operates through specific actions that redirect your energy from managing them to developing yourself. You invest in friendships that provide emotional connection and support rather than making the avoidant your only source of intimacy. You pursue activities and interests that engage you and bring satisfaction rather than spending all free time waiting for the avoidant's availability. You establish professional goals and work toward achievements that create sense of purpose and accomplishment rather than making relationship your only source of meaning. You develop your physical health through exercise and self-care rather than allowing relationship stress to deteriorate your well-being. You engage in personal growth through therapy or learning that expands your capacities rather than remaining stagnant while waiting for them to grow. These independence-building actions serve dual function. They genuinely improve your life and happiness regardless of relationship outcome, and they paradoxically shift the dynamic with the avoidant more effectively than strategic manipulation ever could. When you build genuinely fulfilling life, when you develop authentic happiness that does not depend on them, when you become genuinely busy with satisfying activities and relationships, your decreased dependence on them creates different energy in the dynamic. You are less available not because you are strategically limiting availability, but because you are genuinely occupied with life that fulfills you. You are less focused on them, not because you are performing indifference, but because your attention is genuinely engaged elsewhere. You are less affected by their withdrawal, not because you are pretending not to care, but because your well-being genuinely does not rise and fall with their patterns. This authentic independence affects the avoidant differently than strategic independence because they sense the difference between genuine self-focus and performed self-focus. Genuine independence communicates, "I have built satisfying life that does not need you," at its center, rather than communicating, "I am performing independence to make you want me more." The avoidant respects, or at minimum notices, genuine independence in ways they dismiss or defend against performed independence. Your authentic self-focus also eliminates the pressure that strategic manipulation creates. You are not trying to control them through your independence. You are simply living your life in ways that happen to not revolve around them. The shift to genuine independence also protects you from the continued damage that dependence on their change creates. When your happiness depends on them changing, every day they do not change represents a day of disappointment and suffering. When you build happiness that does not require their change, you experience satisfaction and well-being regardless of their patterns. This protection is not strategy to make them change. It is genuine improvement in your life quality that matters whether or not they ever change. You are no longer hostage to their behavior because your well-being is secured through sources other than their adequate presence. The independence building particularly matters because it positions you to make clear decisions about relationship from place of strength rather than from place of desperation. When you depend on them for your happiness, leaving feels impossible because leaving means losing your only source of well-being. When you build happiness that does not require them, leaving becomes a viable option because you know you will be okay without them. This shift from dependence to independence transforms the power dynamic. You are no longer staying because you cannot survive without them. You are staying only if relationship adds value to already satisfying life, or you are leaving because relationship subtracts value from the fulfilling life you have built. Understanding that you should focus on becoming someone who does not need them to change to be happy allows you to recognize that this shift serves you regardless of relationship outcome. If they eventually choose growth and relationship improves, you will experience that improvement from position of independence that keeps you protected and balanced rather than from position of dependence that would make you vulnerable to future withdrawal. If they never choose growth and you leave, you will leave into already established, satisfying life rather than leaving into void that terrifies you. If they leave you, you will experience that loss from foundation of existing happiness and fulfillment rather than from position where losing them means losing everything. The independence you build is insurance policy that protects you in all scenarios while also creating the genuine self-focus that paradoxically has more power to shift the dynamic than any strategic manipulation of them ever possessed. Enforcing consequences without manipulation teaches them more than any strategy. You have implemented boundaries verbally. You have told the avoidant their patterns are unacceptable. Have explained what treatment you will no longer tolerate. Have warned that certain behaviors will result in consequences. Yet these verbal boundaries have generated no lasting change because verbal boundaries without enforcement are not actually boundaries. They are requests the avoidant can ignore without cost. You have also attempted strategic consequences, implementing no contact to punish them or to make them miss you, withdrawing your presence to teach them a lesson, creating distance to show them what losing you feels like. Yet these strategic consequences also fail to generate lasting change because the avoidant senses the manipulation and the intent to control, activating their defenses rather than teaching them genuine lessons about relationship requirements. The alternative that actually teaches the avoidant involves enforcing real consequences that emerge from genuine boundaries rather than from strategic manipulation. Real consequences flow naturally from your authentic limits. When they cancel plans, the real consequence is you make other plans and are genuinely unavailable next time they want to reschedule rather than remaining available waiting for them. When they withdraw emotionally, the real consequence is you redirect your emotional energy elsewhere and are genuinely less emotionally engaged when they return, rather than immediately re-engaging as if withdrawal created no impact. When they fail to prioritize you adequately, the real consequence is you prioritize yourself and are genuinely less available to accommodate their sporadic attention, rather than remaining perpetually available pending their convenience.